This is a preview file.
I'm Troels Rasmussen, General Manager of Security here at N-able. I'm with my colleague, Lewis, to debate and discuss NIS2 and some of the implications it has to service providers.
And I'm Lewis Pope. I'm one of the head nerds here at N-able, very much focused on practical implementation of security controls, which is going to be very important whenever it comes to implementing and adhering to what is called for inside of NIS2.
So Lewis, why don't you take us through NIS2 and some of the implications it has?
Well, NIS2 came from NIS1, not officially called that, but it's the Network and Information Directive, Security Directive. It is an EU Parliament directive. It came into effect in 2022 for NIS2. One of the most important things to know about it is that it expands the scope of the original NIS. Well, what was it asking for? It was asking for best practices, proper implementation of risk management, a proper due diligence applied to supply chain security. A lot of things that in the end aren't new. The NIS2, and really the NIS as it originally existed, wasn't asking for a new thing, something that had never been done before, something that was unique and unheard of. It was best practices. It was industry recognized security baselines, things that are already defined and called for in many, many different types of compliances. One of the good, fast, quick example I usually give is, well, go look at ISO 27002. That defines the security controls for ISO 27001, and that gives you a kind of a good general idea of, oh, these are the kinds of things that I'm going to be asked to do in order to meet NIS2. Have to make that distinction, though, that NIS2 directive is a EU Parliament directive. Mm-hmm. So now that they have that on the books, it was called for by the 17th of October of 2024 for every EU member state to have NIS2 transposed into laws. Mm-hmm. But what's been happening is not everybody has gotten there yet. Mm-hmm. There are some countries that do not have the laws transcribed yet. There are countries that do. And in a mixed environment like the EU, there's always a little bit of, well, you have to do it one way in one member state, and then you have to do it another way in another member state, and then another way in another member state. And that adds to complexity, and it adds to complications and oversights. And that was one of the problems with the original NIS. It was too fluid in the sense that it allowed each EU member state to kind of figure out what they want to do, how they want to best address cybersecurity risks. But because they were left to figure it out for themselves, there was no commonality on it. Mm-hmm. Everybody got to ask for something different. So you kind of wind up in a system where you have one EU member state that's asking for really good controls, another one that isn't, and how are they influencing each other? If you have a business in the EU, you're probably not restricted to one country. You're probably operating in multiple countries. So each one's going to have a different set of rules, different expectations, and then it makes it more complex to manage, especially if you try to manage what it asks for on a per country basis. So we're going to operate a very specific way in France. We're going to operate a very specific way in another country. And because each country asks for something different and you build your operations to those specific things, you wind up with inefficiencies. You wind up with challenges that come from scale, from lack of skills, from general awareness of, hey, what are the practical implementations of what's being asked for? Risk management is a very big thing that's highlighted there. And if you are not working with a recognized risk framework and you're kind of tackling it just as we walk into an environment, we look at the environment and we say we're just going to go with baseline best practices and not actually perform the risk calculations, the risk exposure, the risk threat modeling, you're going to fall short in certain places more so than others. And that long intro kind of comes back around to simply the NIS2 is an improvement on NIS1 for the purpose of harmonizing the security baselines across the EU. So everybody's on the same page because, the EU is a united front on a lot of different situations. Mm-hmm. And in peacetime and in wartime, you want things to be aligned. You want people to collaboratively work with each other for common defense, common betterment. And that's kind of the NIS2 driving cause there, is to elevate everybody across the board.
Okay, that makes sense. What are some of the key dates and timelines that people should be looking out for?
So we're, as of now, we're past the October 17th, 2024 transcription deadline. So this was the date by which each EU member state was supposed to have the NIS2 directive drafted into law. Not everybody has hit that.
Sure.
Germany, they're fine. They did it a couple of months ago. Mm-hmm. There are other countries, though, that are nowhere near it. They have not published draft legislation. There's not a lot of public information available. Mm-hmm. So you're kind of left in a limbo state of, well, what am I supposed to do? Mm-hmm. The date's already gone past. As of October the 18th, we were supposed to be following these new rules.
Sure.
But those new rules don't exist. Some countries are looking at on January to have it implemented. Others are even looking into March or further of 2025 for having them on the books. That challenge there, though, I don't want anybody to think, well, I can wait.
Sure.
It's again, whatever it's asked for is not going to be anything unique and new that's never been thought of before. Mm-hmm. It's going to be best practices. It's going to be security baselines. Mm-hmm. It's going to be industry recognized things that you should be doing, proper risk management frameworks. So go find those. They already exist. Choose the ones that are appropriate for the verticals that you support, mm-hmm. and go start applying them. And for MSPs and managed service providers and managed security service providers, the same even applies for them. They aren't going to be asked to do anything new. Mm-hmm. They may have new regulatory demands on them for reporting, but the delivery of their services, what kinds of tools they use, what kinds of processes and procedures that they put in place for the day-to-day cybersecurity of environments, that's not new. Mm-hmm. So that's not the challenge. The challenge is really going to be on the regulatory side of things, of adhering to it and proving mm-hmm. that you adhere to it. The next meaningful date is going to be January 2025. Don't know the specific date. I believe it's the 15th. The ENISA has the purview of maintaining a register of entities. Mm-hmm. So NIS2 said, NISA, you are now going to maintain a registry of entities. Mm-hmm. And the entities that should be on this registry should be DNS providers, infrastructure providers, managed security service providers, and managed service providers mm-hmm. are called out by name. By January, you're supposed to be on this NISA managed registry.
Sure.
But for the individual MSPs, they're going to be like, well, how do I? Mm-hmm. And the answer, you don't go straight to NISA. Each country was supposed to implement their own entity, their own body to handle mm-hmm. that, to record the information and then provide it to NISA. And then it would be private, though. It wouldn't be a giant public database that somebody could go look at and see, oh, here's a convenient list of all the MSPs, MSSPs, the DNS service providers and everything in one location. Mm-hmm. They're private for security reasons, but that is a change. MSPs worldwide, this is going to be one of the first, not exactly the first, but one of the first regulatory, you must register with the state.
Okay.
In the U.S., we had Louisiana was the first one in the U.S. that asked for it, but there was no penalties to it. There was no demands of it. It was simply a register with the state so we know you're there. Okay. With the NISA register, it's still that same thing. They want to know who you are, where you operate, the verticals you serve, but there's that backing of the rest of the NIS2 directive and any laws that each EU member state can implement, because each EU state can go further than what the NIS2 directive called for. So even though the NIS2 directive may say that micro businesses are out of scope.
Sure.
So really small businesses, smaller than 50 individuals, a certain limit of revenue a year, it does not apply to you under NIS2. There is nothing stopping an individual member state from saying, well, you know what? We don't like that we're letting that portion of the economy escape out of this. We're going to also say that, we're going to implement our laws in a way to make sure that even though they're out of scope for the NIS2, they may be in scope for our laws and our implementation of it that brings them back in scope again.
Okay. So it would be fair to recap saying if you're an MSP, understand NIS2, start to cater towards it, be intentional with your stack and your software choices, your processes, and assume that you need to adhere to these, but there might be restrictions or tighter requirements than what's in there, but by catering to the current NIS2, you would be in a position to hopefully fast forward into whatever iteration your local government enforces.
Yeah, it is not exactly future-proofing yourself, but there's always the danger of being told by an external force that here are a set of requirements we want you to build to adhere to, that we want you to implement for security purposes. There's always a danger in taking that and only implementing what that calls for and not going any further.
Sure.
Because of budget concerns, plenty of legitimate reasons. Maybe the risk profile isn't high enough that you need more than that. But the danger in that is that you played catch up to get to that point, and now you're behind for anything else that comes down the line.
Sure.
So if you build out your practice, if you scale your efficiencies, you build your programs aligned to just that minimum, then you're going to have to rework it later. So I always say, yes, the NIS2 directives in each EU member state are going to have different specific ways of implementing what's asked for, but it still goes back to it's nothing new. Go follow best practices. Go follow an established framework. That way you're going to be hopefully ahead for a significant amount of time before you have to come back and revisit it.
Yeah. And
even then, whenever it does come time to revisit things, it may be that it's just NIS2 did not, in the original draft language and a lot of the original readings that came out of it, important concepts like identity management weren't in there. They were nested underneath, risk management and some other, functionality of it. But ask somebody who is a security practitioner and they will say identity management is priority one.
Sure.
So there will be that, I won't say a misalignment, but missing pieces. Things that NIS2 are not going to talk about, or even once it is implemented into individual member state laws, there will be gaps. There will be things that are not talked about, and that will be your opportunity. If you are an MSP, that's your opportunity to be better than everyone else. Because there will be something to be said to be able to market yourself and position yourself as someone that can provide help with NIS2. If compliance as a service or fractional or virtual CISO services are a part of what you're offering, adding NIS2 into there, yes, we can adhere to whatever comes out. It's going to make you much more attractive because the businesses that are going to be concerned with this, the important and the essential entities, they're going to be looking for help. And when they're looking for help, they're not going to be looking for help about uptime and printers being able to print. They are going to be looking specifically for compliance assistance, regulatory adherence assistance. And if you can be there, if you can play in that space and be strong there, you're over one of the most significant barriers facing the growth of MSPs. Is that kind of stagnation that comes whenever your service profile and your client profile tops out at, keeping the computers on. When your services kind of top out at there, you're missing so many opportunities. And that is where a significant portion of the MSP space, they're still operating in that. And it's a demand of the market. That's what their clients need and want. But what their clients need and want is going to start being dictated more by those external forces like NIS2, like cybersecurity insurance applications. So it's all part of that larger journey that MSPs, if they can take advantage of it, is going to put them in much, much better positions over time.
For sure. And that's what we normally see with these regulatory requirements that comes from governments and so forth, is they're taking best practices and enforcing them to some degree. And what we at least have seen in the US to a great degree is it's a tailwind for the service providers, right?
It absolutely is.
It's less about selling. Now you tell, or you could cater to whatever legislation or compliance requirement and help your customers adhere or meet to that. Could you, and by talking about that, could you dive into some of the tailwinds you're seeing, like specific areas MSPs could focus and might see opportunity?
Yeah, so, and there's always that, whenever you have tailwinds, whenever you have something that is forcing a decision, that's actually, it's not even a decision anymore, it's almost a mandate. You don't have to convince your prospective clients anymore. They are coming to you, or they are searching out those that can assist them with it. So even as simple as market presence is, having a website, having social communications, having a presence that presents you as more than just computer people. That helps out a lot, because whenever your existing clients and prospective clients are going out and they're being now told or dictated to by their insurance, by your regulatory agents that they must do something, they're going to go find somebody that can do that thing for you. You have to be the person that they think of first.
Sure.
Because if you're not who they think of first, they're going to go start looking. And if they go start looking, you're losing the narrative. You're losing control over the narrative. And you can find yourself in situations where a client says, we applied for cyber insurance and they made us a referral to another company. They need access to these systems because we just signed a contract with them. As an MSP, you don't want to hear that, because of why is somebody poking around in my backyard? Is that churn potential? Is that potential a threat to me? Is it just simple loss of revenue because we were never going to do that in the first place? Or is that external company that was brought in doing the same thing that we were already doing? We just weren't talking about it the right way. We weren't letting the client know. A great example of that is vulnerability remediation and mitigation services is a very big subcomponent of proper risk management. And a lot of MSPs undersell the importance of what they're doing sometimes in these things, such as patch management. As trivial as a thing as it is, especially with modern tools like what we have with our patch management engine, makes it simple for somebody to manage patching. But you shouldn't let the fact that the tools make the job easy devalue the service that you're delivering. I'm a pretty big advocate of, if you have clients that aren't paying you to do patch management today, they're not going to pay you to do patch management tomorrow.
Sure.
You have to change the conversation. You have to talk to them about vulnerability remediation and mitigation services as part of your broader package of cybersecurity services. Is patch management a part of that? It is. It's a significant part of it, but telling somebody I'm going to patch your systems does not sound as doesn't sound as expensive and impressive as telling somebody you're handling their vulnerability remediation and mitigation practices.
So condensed down, let's talk about what you do, but more the problems you solve and how that ties back to some of the requirements that your customer might need to adhere to.
Right, exactly. And also doing it from the point of view of the trusted business advisor as well. This is something that a lot of MSPs have actively avoided. They didn't want the exposure and the liability that would come from going to a business that they provide services to and telling that business to change how you run your business. But that's something that you have to do sometimes, especially whenever we get into regulatory things like NIS2, where data privacy, reporting requirements, the kind of data that has to be retained for how long. To do those things, you may legitimately have to tell a business, you have to change how you run your business. Are they primed for that? Are they ready to accept that? Are they going to, look at you and tell you that, well, that's not your place. We don't need you to tell us how you run the business. MSPs need to get more comfortable with having those level of conversations, because you can't let your client dictate their risk exposure that they're generating for you.
No.
And you on the same side can't accept risk on behalf of your client. You know your clients, you understand what their budgets are and everything. You would probably know right off the bat if a client would not be willing to pay for, a E3 license from Microsoft. Their budgeting won't allow it. You will never convince them of it. But you can't say, well, I'm never going to talk to them about it, and I'm never going to talk to them about the additional log ingestion and the additional security event information that we could get out of the system if we purchase those more expensive licenses. So now you're saying, well, I know they're not going to want to spend that money, and because they're not going to want to spend that money, their risk profile is larger, but I'm not going to take the time to have that conversation with the client. MSPs have to be getting a lot more comfortable with having that particular conversation and figuring out how they can do that at scale in a way that's honoring the intent of it and not being a cost center that's not going to return any value for them.
That makes sense. So let's say you're a service provider. You're getting acquainted with NIS2. What are the 4 things that you do?
First thing is internal accounting of yourself. MSPs and MSSPs are called out by name in the NIS2 directive as regulated as entities. And then figure out, well, do my clients that I support, are they going to fall into the category of important or essential? Kind of make those first distinctions, because that's going to tell you potentially how much you have to be worried about this. If all of your clients are micro businesses, so they're not even within scope, then it's like, well, I don't have to worry about for my clients, but now I still have to worry for myself because I am a named entity. So internal assessment of yourself. What are you doing? Can you contend with what's being asked of you? And again, they're not asking for anything new. And then look at your client base. Are they essentials? Are they important? And do you have messaging prepared to go have conversations with them? Are your clients already coming to you with these conversations? Do they even know about this or not? That's going to be highly variant upon, who you serve, what kind of industries they're on, which country they are in. And you may be going into your clients who are important entities by the classification who have no clue whatsoever. And you're going to have to be the educator. But then you have to also be the educator and not the salesman. While still trying to be the salesman.
Sure.
Because you need them to know, you need them to get on board with it because it's in their best interest. But it's also in your interest to kind of reduce your risk exposure and also open up opportunity for services. And I think another immediate thing that you would want to do is honestly just go read the NIS2 directive. It's not that long. It's 30 some articles, easy to read and understand. And it's for me, do that as a confidence building exercise. Because if all you know is NIS2, it's an EU Parliament directive, It was passed 3 years ago. It's supposed to be implemented this month, and that's like the extent of what you know. You're going to be apprehensive. You don't know what you don't know. So I really encourage just read the directive, then write down a list of, all right, here are the EU countries that we're going to offer services in. We need to go and look at what each EU country implemented in law. Okay. Have they done it yet? Is it already on the books or not? So there's still that significant amount of legwork you're probably going to have to do, but it's a cost of doing business in the EU now.
For sure. You mentioned patch management as an example. What are some of the technologies you believe an MSP or a service provider should really double down on, and what are some of the technologies that might see extra tailwind from the NIS2?
I think one of the biggest things, especially for the EU market, is simply the 24/7 thing.
Sure.
A lot of MSPs offer 24/7 monitoring and alerting, but there's only, an 8 to 5 office staffed to respond to things, and everything else is off of alerts and automatic actions, and it goes into queue, and somebody will pick it up in the morning, or if somebody's on call, somebody, something happens at 2 a.m., whoever's on call can get the notification, and eventually 30 minutes or 40 minutes later, they may actually be working and looking at that instance. That's the biggest, I think, change is going to be that need to go over to 24/7 services, especially for security monitoring, because we're in a world where, identity management, another new big component that you need to be on top of as an MSP. That's a very good early warning of multiple threats that can occur. Data exfiltration, initial access, industrial espionage, all kinds of things nowadays start out with identity compromise. And it's either stolen credentials, that's still valid, but also token thefts are a very big type of attack now. So being able to have 24/7, 365 eyes on something as simple as the logins and the access attempts for Intra ID or any cloud service, that's going to become table stakes. That is, you have to be able to do that now. And that is a very big jump in capabilities for a lot of MSPs. And no illusions there. There are absolutely very successful MSPs out there that don't have the internal skill set or tooling for that right now. And that will be a new skill, a new capability they're going to need to go obtain, bring in-house, but then they have to figure out, are we going to purchase a tool to do this? Are we going to purchase a service to do this? Do we have, if we take it as a tool, do we have the appropriate internal staffing for it? So that's a very big thing. And past the 24/7 identity management, the next thing would be vulnerability management and risk, the broader category of risk management. I'm a very, very big advocate for maintaining risk registers for every one of your clients. You may have, some people will see those, or I've heard of those as other types of tools like risk acceptance letters. You go to a client, there's something wrong, you make the recommendation, they say, no, we're not going to fix it, and they sign a risk acceptance letter. Those are okay, but you're still kind of letting the clients dictate back to you a little bit too much. I prefer maintaining a giant, it can be big, it is time intensive, it can take a little bit of effort, but that's why it's a little bit better suited for compliance as a service or vCISO type services that you offer, of just having that risk register that details, these are the deficiencies in the environment, this is the risk that it represents, the monetary impact, how it will affect the business, who is accountable for it, and their signature and date of, are we going to fix it or not? And by maintaining that giant risk register that can grow over time, you're kind of drawing the line in the sand, putting your foot down and saying, look, we know these are problems. We've brought it to your attention. They really need to be addressed. In the end, you're accountable. And as the business owner, as the business decision maker, and that accountability is even reflected in the NIS2. It's now it is a whole of business whenever it comes to information security and network security. There's that kind of a undercurrent that these aren't things that can be tossed to the side that other parts of the business can be blamed for anymore.
Sure.
It's a whole of business decision. And if the whole of business makes this decision, then it's who is accountable in the end. It's C-suite, board members, presidents. Those are the ones that are going to be carrying accountability now in ways that they didn't previously have accountability. So I think that's another really big thing for MSPs to get focused on as kind of a priority thing, is getting a handle on accountability. Who was responsible for what in the relationship between you and your clients?
And that's a very important takeaway, that security is no longer an IT problem. It's a business problem, and you need to treat it as such.
Yes.
One thing that people tend to forget is the time to disclose and any requirements on notifying of a breach or any other security events. Does NIS2 dictate any of that?
It does, and it's a significant change, and it's something that at first glance it feels really onerous, but it makes sense. If you are affected by an incident, there's a 24-hour initial reporting window. So if you're essential or important, something happens, there's a data breach, material impact to operations, whatever falls under scope, 24 hours to do an initial reporting or an alert. Then there's a 72-hour window to file an actual report, more detailed. And then there's a 1-month deadline for a more robust, post-incident investigation, root cause analysis type report. That's going to be new for a lot of MSPs. They've never had to do or file these types of reports before. There's a lot of MSPs that, post-incident investigations or even root cause analysis is outside of scope of what they've traditionally done. And we're usually we'll engage with an incident response company or a third party to come in and do this kind of work. But because those timelines are so tight now, France has the 72-hour reporting window for cyber insurance claims. So not just because of NIS2, but also because of their particular implementation by law, there's a 72-hour window on reporting for an insurance claim to be honored. That's independent of the NIS2 requirement that you have to report to your fusion centers or the equivalent entity within each EU member state that, hey, we had an incident 18 hours ago. We'll send you an update in 72. Here's a 72-hour update with more information. And then at the 1-month mark, here's our final assessment, post-incident root cause analysis of the event. And one of the reasons why I like it so much myself is because it kind of encourages MSPs and businesses to not sweep things under the rug, because sweeping things under the rug is how trends get missed.
Sure.
That's how much damage is actually being done gets missed. Whenever you go look at any global report from Five Eyes Nation, from a giant corporate behemoth like Verizon, or even the FBI crime report here in the U.S., wherever, take your pick, choose a report on cybercrime, and they'll have a number associated with ransomware attacks. And there'll always be that asterisk down there that says reported ransomware attacks. The $100,000, the $1 million ransoms, they get reported all the time. Those $30,000 ransoms, $40,000, $60,000, those don't get reported as often. And I think putting this pressure on it by the penalties that exist, but also those tightened timeframes for reporting, it's encouraging you to be more upfront, get the information out into that community of other defenders, so that they know, hey, there's an active campaign going on, because that's one of the most important things to modern defenders whenever it comes to dealing with cybercrime and cyber threats is threat intelligence. And if you're operating in a silo, suffering from attacks and not getting that information back out into the community somehow, then it's silent abuse that happens behind a door that nobody ever happens about. And that's going to impact resources allocated. It's going to impact the public perception of it not being that big of a deal. One of the biggest challenges that the MSP runs into whenever they try to advertise or market their services to potential new clients is the age-old, well, I'm not valuable. It's not going to happen to me. And I'm hoping that these types of reporting mechanisms is going to increase knowledge in the zeitgeist so that people know and understand better that, oh, it doesn't matter if I am big or not. It doesn't matter if we're a 3 million euro or a 40 million euro business. We're still a viable target.
That's fair. And one thing that MSPs and their customers will start to appreciate is notifications to their customers, right? Like data breach, any other security event, and what that means to a relationship. So ensuring that there's a good, say, separation of who does what, who owns what, is very valid when you're engaging with your customers as a service provider. To wrap this up, Louis, what are the 2 sentences that you would emphasize in regards to NIS2 to our community?
It is an opportunity, not a burden. Take advantage of it. And also, I think the second one would be, even if you're not going to look at it as an opportunity, look at it as a pressure to get yourself and your clients out of the old way of business. The world is changing. You have to be able to take advantage of those changes, or those changes are going to leave you behind. So it's an opportunity. Take advantage of it as an opportunity. But also don't let it become a barrier either. Because if you're not going to take advantage and you're not going to talk to it, you're going to start falling out of favor from the market, because you're now offering less than what the market is going to start demanding.
Okay, that's a really good point. And with that being said, thank you so much for listening. We appreciate your time, and you'll hear way more about NIS2.